Welcome to AAP's Advocacy 101 training. This is part one of our training, and we will be going through the legislative process. My name is Christopher Rorick. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor with Bryan Cave, and we serve as AAP's Government Relations Consultants in our nation's capital. We're going to focus first on the legislative process to give you a quick understanding of the process in which you will be going to Capitol Hill to advocate on behalf of AAP. It's important to know the types of legislation that you will be lobbying. Our first slide will look at different types of legislation. You'll probably be most familiar with House bills and Senate bills. These are pieces of legislation that amend current law and have to work its way through each chamber of Congress and be signed by the President in order to become law. There are also resolutions, which are a simple sense of Congress. Congress making a statement of policy and do not have the full backing of standard legislation or law. There are joint resolutions, concurrent resolutions, and simple resolutions. Simple resolutions only have to go through one chamber of Congress, where concurrent and joint resolutions have to go through both chambers of Congress. We'll now look at how legislation gets introduced. Let's say that AAP has a suggestion for how they would like to revise GME. We would be noted as a stakeholder here or a constituent. We would work with a member of Congress on our policy idea, suggesting what we'd like to see in a piece of legislation and how we'd like to amend current law. We would then work with that member of Congress to develop bill language. The member of Congress would send that to Legislative Council, which would draft that in bill form. And then the bill would, of course, be introduced and be a current piece of legislation that was before Congress. Now, once you have a piece of legislation before Congress, it needs to work its way through the legislative process. First, it is introduced by either a House member or a Senate member in either the House or Senate. It is then sent to a committee of jurisdiction. We are typically dealing with healthcare committees of jurisdiction at AAP. So in the House, that would be the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over all public health issues, and the Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over Medicare and Medicaid. On the Senate side, you'd be dealing with the Senate Help Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. Senate Help Committee is Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, and they have jurisdiction over public health, and the Finance Committee has jurisdiction over Medicare and Medicaid funding. The first action would be for the committee to hold a hearing. This is simply where folks come and testify on behalf or in opposition to a particular bill. The next stage in the process, which would be typically held on a separate day, would be a markup. That is where the work of the committee really begins, in the sense that they can amend a bill at that time, and they would either pass the bill out of committee or it would fail to pass out of committee. Once it passes, assuming it passes out of the markup, it then is sent to the floor, where it is subjected to debate, additional amendments, and passage. And once it works its way through both the House and the Senate, it would go to what's called a conference committee, and that is where members of the House, select members of the House and Senate, sit down in a committee, and they resolve the differences between the House and Senate versions of the bill. That resolved version then goes through both the House and Senate again before being sent to the President, who either signs or vetoes the bill. Once it becomes law, then begins the regulatory process, where each agency then begins to implement the intent of Congress through the regulatory process. So once a bill gets introduced on either the House or the Senate, it is then sent to a committee of jurisdiction. The committees then have a series of actions that must be taken, which we will address in our next slide, either a hearing and a markup. Once passed out of the committees of jurisdiction, they are sent to the floor, where they are debated, further amended, and passed. assuming a bill passes both the House and the Senate, and there are differences between the bills as they come out of the House and Senate, they are sent to a conference committee. Conference committees are made up of a few members of the House and a few members of the Senate, and they are established to resolve differences between the House and Senate versions. Once the conference committee passes out a single version of the bill, it is then passed again through the House and Senate before being sent to the President for signature or veto. Assuming the President signs the bill and it becomes law, it is then sent to the regulatory agencies to begin the regulatory process, where that agency will carry out the will of Congress. Just a quick slide to detail the committee process in a little greater detail. Bills are referred to a committee, for example, the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over many issues, including health. They have a health subcommittee, so all health bills would be sent to that particular subcommittee dealing with just health issues. Typically, then, a committee will hold a hearing on a bill, and at this point, folks in opposition or in support of the bill will testify. Members of the committee will ask questions of the folks testifying and make statements about their support or opposition for the bill as well. At a subsequent date, the committee will hold what's called a markup, which is the real business meeting of the committee. At that point, they will amend the bill, and they will either pass or fail to pass a bill, and this is called the markup stage. Once a bill is reported out of committee, it passes markup, it passes the subcommittee, it passes the full committee, it is reported out and sent to the House floor or Senate floor. That concludes the first section, which details the legislative process. In Part 2 of our Advocacy 101, we will look at congressional outreach, how to establish a relationship with a member of Congress and their staff. First, just the basics. Congress is made up of 535 members, 435 members of the House, and 100 members of the Senate. Each person typically has one representative from the House, and then each state has 2 representatives in the Senate. An easy way to locate your representative is to either go to house.gov and senate.gov, and you simply put in your address, and it will return who your member of Congress is. Don't forget, oftentimes in the House, you may have 2 representatives that you can establish a relationship with, one that might represent your institution and one that might be your home district in which you are a voter, but it's important to establish a relationship with both if, in fact, you have 2 separate representatives. And if you need to do legislative research, it's always important to go to congress.gov, which we'll go into in a little bit greater detail, but that is a great resource to do your legislative research. So first, a typical congressional office makeup. You, of course, have your members of Congress. You have then the Chief of Staff, who is responsible for running the office for the member of Congress. You have a district director. The district director typically handles the member of Congress's office back in your home state. So, of course, your member has offices in your state and also in Washington, D.C. The district director is largely responsible for constituent relationships, and it's important to get to know that person, particularly if you'd like to have a site visit back in your home district. The district director is the one who would facilitate that. Back in Washington, D.C., you have your legislative director and legislative aide, which are responsible for educating the member of Congress on all of the issues. Typically, the legislative director will handle all of the issues. A legislative aide will have probably 3 or 4 issues that they handle. So they may handle education issues and healthcare issues, and they're responsible and report directly to the legislative director, and those 2 in tandem will educate the member of Congress about those particular issues. It's not uncommon when you come to Washington, D.C. to meet with a legislative director or legislative aide, if in fact you can't meet with the member themselves, and oftentimes that legislative aide will be in the meeting even if you do meet with a member of Congress. So it's very important to establish a relationship with them. And then, of course, you have the scheduler. If you're scheduling a meeting with the member of Congress, you will want to go through the scheduler. They're very important, as they are, of course, the gatekeeper to that member of Congress. So you want to get to know the scheduler in order to set up an appointment with your member of Congress. So how do you reach out? What's the best way to build a relationship? Well, after you find who your representative is, you want to call their office and ask for the names of the LA or legislative aide who handles healthcare issues. Take down that person's name, their contact information, particularly the email. You'd like to send an introductory email to that Health LA, suggesting that you live in the district, work in the district, and that you would like to introduce yourselves and talk about a few issues. Particularly if you're going to be coming to Washington, D.C., it's nice to talk to the LA ahead of time and let them know that you will be coming into town. So what are the most important methods of communication? Well, of course, these days, the preferred method is email communication. You always want to try and send to that Health LA, as we discussed earlier, if possible. If not, just send to a generic address list, which you will find on every member of Congress's web page. You always want to keep it short and simple, avoid multiple messages, and allow an ample time for response. They may not get back to you the same day. Typically, a lot of staff will wait till the end of the week to do constituent relations when their boss is out of town and may not respond till the end of the week when they have time to go through all of their constituent emails. So building a relationship. As we mentioned before, each congressional office has offices in the state as well as D.C. The district staff are important folks to get to know. First step is to call the district director that we talked about earlier and ask for a meeting. You want to talk to them about your facility, ask them to help you schedule a visit to your facility, and arrange a visit to your facility by a member of Congress. It's always important to check with your facility first and make them aware that you are trying to set something up, as they may have additional questions or additional relationships. Now, when you're visiting D.C., you always want to try and notify AAP staff if you plan to visit D.C. We can certainly help facilitate your meeting. You want to contact the scheduler to arrange the meeting. All of that information is available on each member's website. You want to notify that Health LA of your plans, as we talked about previously, and then you want to prepare for the meeting, which is becoming educated about your issues, get all the adequate background material that you'll need, do your legislative research, and come prepared. You always want to check the status of legislation that we may be following or advocating on behalf or in opposition to, and one can do this at www.congress.gov. It's a very versatile resource where you can have the option of searching by a bill number if you know it, or just by a word or phrase. Simply type that in and all current legislation will pop up that are dealing with that particular keyword. And if we're dealing with a particular issue AAP is advocating on behalf of, we will prepare you in advance and provide you with that bill number. It's important to check if your member of Congress is a co-sponsor of that legislation. That can be done on congress.gov. It will list the co-sponsors of a particular bill. So you want to thank your member if they're co-sponsoring a particular bill that we're in favor of, or if they're not, you would like to ask them to become a co-sponsor. Additional valuable resources are the Congressional Calendar. This is important to know when members of Congress might be back in the district, an important time to set up a district meeting. Each chamber maintains their own calendars and will note on there, the links are available through the PowerPoint presentation here. They will note when they are in session and when they are back in the district on what is called recess. Anytime recess appears on the calendar, they are typically back in the district and are available for district meetings. It's also valuable to get a comprehensive listing of the terms that are used in the legislative process that we may have gone over very briefly before. If you need additional research, additional information on this, please go to congress.gov/help/legislative glossary. Very quickly, what are some do's and don'ts when you are meeting with a member of Congress or their staff? You do want to personalize everything. Remember, the member is representing the district, and you want to make everything about the district, so about the institution, about the people who are impacted back in the district. If there are federal dollars flowing back there, you want to mention that. Personalize everything. Tell your story. Of course, thank them. Have support materials and do your research that we talked about earlier. AAP is happy to provide you with support materials. Be flexible. The schedule on Capitol Hill is always changing, so understand that you may not meet at the time you are scheduled, particularly if it is meeting with the member of Congress. Be prepared to have to wait. And always have an ask. While it's fine to just have and develop a relationship, it's always nice to have an ask, and by that, meaning a particular issue that you want the congressman or congresswoman to be active on. Some don'ts. You always just don't assume they know anything about your profession. Start at the very basics. Let them tell you that they know everything about what you do, but just assume they know nothing. Remember, that particular person you're speaking with probably handles 3 or 4 issues, so has a lot on their plate. Don't bring in personal politics. Remember that you are there just to discuss the issues that AAP cares about, and if you're representing the society, you don't want to talk about your personal politics as well. And don't discuss fundraising. This is a big no-no. You don't mention any sort of political activity on behalf of your personal giving or on behalf of the organization while you're in an official capacity up on Capitol Hill or in the district. And don't be intimidated. Remember, these folks are there working for you. You know more about what you're talking about, including your profession, than they do. So you're just there to have a conversation and express your opinion. There's no reason to be intimidated by that. And then it's important to nurture that relationship after your meeting. It's important to stay connected. You may want to pass along articles or studies that have come along following your meeting. You always want to let them know that you're watching. If they've done something that supports our cause, please thank them. Send them an email. If they've done something that they need to hear about that may be in opposition to our cause, they need to know that as well. It's important that they know that we're paying attention and are sort of held accountable for their actions. And that is our responsibility, so it's important to stay in touch. I want to thank you for your time, and as always, please contact us with any further questions. Thank you.